Good morning. There's a new development in the Conflict of Interest Bureau in British Columbia. Yesterday, Peter Pollen, leader of the Conservative Party, went to the courthouse to lay in information, in effect a charge. Against whom were you laying the information, Mr. Pollen?
The Minister of Energy, Stephen Rogers.
And what are the grounds of your laying this information? Under which act?
The Financial Disclosure Act of the Province of British Columbia.
On conflict of interest?
No, not a conflict of interest, on the legislative requirement for all elected officials to file a full disclosure of their financial interests.
You're referring, therefore, to the public statements about Mr. Rogers' 100,000 unit in the tax shelter in Western Pulp.
That's right.
With whom did you lay the information?
With the Justice of the Peace in the courthouse of the City of Victoria.
Mr.
Art Reed.
And what did he tell you? You signed the information?
I swore the information before him.
And will he now issue a summons against Mr. Rogers?
This is what he led me to believe. This is what he told me.
And you're doing this as a citizen and leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in British Columbia?
That's right.
Any idea, did Mr. Reid tell you when Mr. Rogers might get a summons?
Well, he said there was a time frame in which it had to be done, and I came away with the impression it was 3 weeks, that was the time limit, and I had the impression that the summons would be served within that time.
One final question. My memory tells me that the Attorney General has appointed a distinguished lawyer to look into the question. Are you not prepared to wait for that result?
Well, I don't think that's an appropriate course of action. The bill is very simple. It needs really no interpretation at all, and I just think that it must be done this way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Pollen, leader of the Tory party in British Columbia.
Right.
Coincidentally, Premier Bennett, with Finance Minister Curtis, is holding what I believe to be a major press conference in Victoria this morning, 9:30 or so, might be to deal with the funding promised in his speech for education and for hospital, may also be to give the details of the compensation stabilisation plan to which the Premier also referred. On the programme today, though, I've got details of a fascinating judgment in a 9-day drama that took place in court in Vancouver recently. It was an unusual action in which a woman claims, after a 10-year lesbian relationship, maintenance for herself and 2 children born to her by artificial insemination, and also a share of the property of the lesbian couple. I have the mother here, Penny Anderson, the plaintiff in the action, and her lawyer, Mr. Peter Fraser. I'm going to deal too this morning with Jim Matkin, the president of the Business Council of British Columbia, as we come up to one of the biggest years of trade union bargaining in the past quarter century in British Columbia. And later in the program, you're going to meet the irrepressible John Crosbie, the Minister of Justice, out here dickering with all the attorneys general from all across Canada. But first, Penny Anderson and Peter Fraser after the break. Ten-year relationship. Husband and wife.
Sure. Penny can tell you about the relationship.
Another goddamn crack out of you, and you can sit here and do the goddamn interview. Smart son of a bitch. Say that with some relic of affection.
Yes, of course.
But not that much.
You know,
15 seconds coming back here.
I think I might start by saying that how times have changed. This judgment deals with the split up after a 10-year lesbian relationship between Penny and Arlene Luoma. Now, in effect, let me keep this very simple. I'm going to go to you first, Peter Fraser, the lawyer.
All right.
Was this, in effect, seeking a form of divorce under all the various laws for maintenance and sharing property and maintenance of children?
I wanted the court to treat Penny the same way they would have treated a wife who had a marriage broken up or a common law couple whose relationship had broken up. Exactly the same.
And did you get the relief you sought in this particular judgment?
Half. We got a share of the property, but the kids got nothing.
Now, do you think that that was a good judgment? Because the judge really, he goes through your relationship, and then he says that you had the children because you wanted to have the children and for no other reason, by artificial insemination.
Well, I guess I'm half happy because I'm very happy about the property settlement, but I am disappointed that he didn't recognize the children as being, well, I guess legitimate children from this relationship and give them maintenance.
That's the point. Had it been a common law relationship between man and woman, would the children have received maintenance as an automatic thing?
If you changed one fact in this situation, which is the gender of the defendant, if the defendant had been a man, if they'd lived together for 10 years, if there had been children born of artificial insemination, the children would have got support.
But the children were born of artificial insemination. What was the difference in your case, therefore?
Just the gender of both parents, that because Arlene was also a woman. Had it been a man, the children of artificial insemination are recognized as being the legitimate children.
The circumstances of the marriage breakup were very similar, were they not, to the breakup of any normal, if I can use that word, heterosexual relationship.
Yes, the affair with the secretary, everything I guess was very much like happens every day, and they hear about it every day in the courts.
So therefore the Family Relations Act does not apply in this particular case.
Well, that's what the judge held. I contended that it ought to apply and that the policy of the statute was to support the children of a relationship, and that the importance of this policy overrode some difficulties in words. I mean, the Act refers to stepfather, for example, or father, and it doesn't specifically refer to a person like the defendant Arlene. Now, the judge held that that blocked his ability to grant child support. I contended, unsuccessfully, that it ought not to block that support.
Did you not make a case for the fact that the Supreme Court can apply maintenance to the providing parent? That was your case.
That was my case.
But you lost that case.
I did.
Well, you must feel a little bit unhappy about that, though you're happy with winning half of the battle.
Yes.
Does this indicate an explosion of actions or a prevention of explosion of actions? Are there many relationships like this, said Webster rather unsophisticatedly?
Actually, you know, there are getting to be more. Most of the lesbian families, the children have come from previous marriages of the women, but it's getting a lot more common now that lesbians are choosing to have children as a part of their lesbian relationship, and they're having them often by artificial insemination the way that I did.
The judge made quite a comment, did he not, through his judgment, on the form of kind of relationship to a marriage. What were these points that he made?
Well, he looked at the relationship and he saw that these two people lived together. They were faithful to one another. They had joint bank accounts, joint credit cards. They traveled together. They traveled as a family. They got family rates when they traveled. They were regarded as a family. Penny's parents treated Arlene as an in-law. It was precisely like a marriage in every way. In fact, I suggested to the judge that the case was almost banal, that the relationship was so conventional that it was hard to point out a way in which it was different from any marriage, except the fact that the two partners were both of the same sex.
And you, of course, you fulfilled, it says here, the traditional role as homemaker, and your partner was the breadwinner all the way through.
Yes.
But what did you think of when the judge said, the children, it said, the judge said, I reject the concept that the births of the children were in any way related to an agreement by the defendant to provide maintenance. The children, like most children, were born out of a strong desire by their mother to have children and for no other reason.
You know, I really don't know how to comment on that because I don't know where he's coming from when he said that, because I have thought that usually when children are born of a union, it's the desire of both parents, not just the mother. So when he's saying
but when you say born of a union, you mean born of a heterosexual union. Whereas, was it difficult to have the artificial insemination done between a lesbian couple? Was
No.
it difficult in terms of finding doctors who thought it was a proper thing to do?
Initially, it was the first time that I started investigating the possibilities. The only doctor that I could find in Vancouver turned me down because I was a lesbian. And then I variously found a doctor in Seattle, and then my doctor found somebody in Vancouver.
Who did it?
Who did
and
it.
regarded it as perfectly ethical and proper so to do.
Yes, he feels that lesbians should have the same rights as any other.
But isn't there a quibble there that even in a normal heterosexual relationship, that if the father doesn't supply the semen, the children are illegitimate?
Well, I think the only people who quibble about that, frankly, are the lawyers.
It's the lawyers themselves.
I mean, anybody who wants to deny to you and me on the street that where the partner or the father agrees to the insemination process and then should be able to walk away without responsibilities from the children.
We'd say that was nonsense.
I would say so.
Now, on the other hand, while you did not get maintenance for your two children, you did get the property settlement. Was that a property settlement as in a divorce, quote, unquote?
Absolutely. I mean, the road there was not precisely the same, but we took one of the traditional roads to a property division, and it succeeded. Now, this has definite implications for homosexual relationships across the country. There's no question about it.
Tell me that. Well, tell me that after the break. I'm going to take some telephone calls on this. I'm delicate about them, but I'll take telephone calls on this, and I want you to give me the wider implications of whether or not you're going to appeal the judgment after the break.
I think they are legitimate now. That is one of the things of the Berger Commission.
Oh, in other words, this could apply to all homosexual relationships.
Absolutely.
Sharing of property.
Yeah.
Yes.
Contract of trust.
Yeah.
Constructive trust.
Constructive trust.
Oh-ho. Hey, you're okay when you break up with your...
I'm married.
Are you still married?
I'm
Oh,
married.
damn it.
And there's another way.
And children to prove it.
He's different. He's American. Go on.
There's another way in which it, I think, will have a negative impact, and that is, I think it could pave the way for the Family Relations Act to be declared unconstitutional.
Christ. Jesus,
Well, we've got different family units these
right.
days. You know, when was the Family Relations Act first drawn up and the amendments? There's new families.
Very good. I'm glad I picked out that report there. That's it. Erin and Anna. Erin's a wee boy, is it?
Girl.
Erin.
Her middle name is Arlene, which is the defendant's
Oh,
name. She was named
Erin.
after...
How would I think Erin's a wee boy? Because Erin means
Erin.
island.
Yeah.
To Peter Fraser, Penny Anderson's lawyer. Question. What will the precedent value be of this judgment in the homosexual community?
This is the first time that recognized principles of trust have been applied to a homosexual couple. My guess is that any homosexual couple which exists for a minimum period of time and where the two people acquire property, one will be able to seek a share of that property if the relationship breaks up.
Well, that's a vast change in the present laws.
Well, I think it's a logical change. It's not surprising in the sense that the existing precedent, especially the leading case from the Supreme Court of Canada, uses language which says this equitable right, this right based on ideas of fairness, will have to vary according to the circumstances.
As in a marriage.
Exactly.
I mean, the judge is always a final discretion as to how they're going to split up property in any case, right? Yeah. No matter what the agreements are. Now, what about the Family Relations Act? Because very bluntly, the judge, I think it's bluntly, says, does the Family Relations Act have any application where the persons parties are persons of the same gender? And he says, no. And that's the one under which a heterosexual couple would get all the maintenance and relief, is it not?
Well, I am waiting with interest for the other shoe to drop.
What's the other shoe?
The other shoe is the charter. I believe that with this holding, which I accept, at least for the moment, as correct, as I must, the act becomes vulnerable to an attack under the Charter.
Discrimination.
Because the children of a homosexual relationship are denied benefits that are not denied to the children of other relationships.
But doesn't the judge say that they're not children of a relationship, they're Penny's children? Doesn't the judgment say that?
No, I think if you look at the judgment, you'll see that he equates the status of Arlene, the defendant, as a parent. And he, in his language overall, equates her role with the role of a father.
You're not ready yet to say whether or not you're going to appeal the judgment?
I'm not ready yet. I feel a bit schizophrenic about the judgment, frankly. I'm tremendously happy at half the result.
At the property value.
That's
What are
right.
your plans for your future, Penny?
Oh, Jack, I don't know.
But it says here that you're able and capable to bring up children on your own, doesn't it?
Yes. The last while, I've had to dedicate myself to the children. The breakup was very hard on them, and which is usual for children of divorcing parents. But they completely lost one parent, and it's been very hard on them. So I've dedicated my time to them, and I've been advised to do that by a counselor as well. I'm going to be going to work.
Retraining and go back to work.
Yes. I hope the construction industry picks up and I can get a job in construction.
I hope so too. What did you do before in construction?
Yes.
Were you a bookkeeper?
Work for builders.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm wondering how Miss Anderson feels about the media attention that she's been getting recently. I noticed that it's been carried on most of the major network news, excuse me, the radio news, and I was just wondering how she would react to it, because I feel the media, as being myself in the media, in the news area, I was wondering, basically, does she feel that she's getting the media attention because it's a viable story, or whether or not she's getting the media attention because it's quote-unquote cute?
I think it's probably both. And the media attention is probably, I knew it was going to be inevitable that when I went to court there was going to be a lot of media attention because of the uniqueness of the case. And a lot of people are genuinely interested in it.
Mm-hmm. That's why I've got you on there this morning. And it's partly, it's the girl wants to know, combination of both, public interest and
curiosity.
Curiosity in some ways, and also you're breaking new legal ground along with Peter Fraser, your lawyer. Thank you, caller.
Oh, just, hello?
Yeah?
Yes, I'd just like to quickly ask if she feels that it's an exploitation, rather, of the case, and if she feels it's hurting her case, and I'll hang up now.
Thank you. Media exploitation. Am I exploiting you this morning, Penny Anderson?
I'm not feeling exploited, Jack, and I don't think it's hurting my case.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, according to the Constitution and the fact that Pierre Elliott Trudeau turned around and made these situations legal, I think the judge should have taken this into consideration and given her the full
protection of the Family Relations Act, etc.
Yes.
In other words, do you suggest, caller, do you, that this should be a normal court marriage and normal divorce?
Yes, I certainly do. Considering the fact that Pierre Elliott Trudeau made all this legal.
Consenting act between adults. Thank you. What do you say to that?
I agree
the
with
charter.
that. Yes.
The charter is the other shoe, isn't it? Go ahead from Kamloops.
Hello, I more have a question for the lawyer. As in the judge's decision, does he consider this kind of a discriminatory decision because of the only difference really being the gender of the other partner? Because as a family man myself, I mean, God, I've got those commitments all the way through my marriage, and I sort of have to live up to those. I can't really see any difference in this case because of that fact between this and any other case. I mean.
Okay, that's your point.
Yep.
Your response is much like most people who've talked to me about this case, but let's be fair to the judge. He had some difficult language in the Family Relations Act to contend with, which tends to talk about men and women, fathers and mothers, and so on. And it was difficult to slot Arlene Luoma into any of those pigeonholes. On a policy level, I'm with you.
Yeah, do you think that perhaps it's time for a revamping of that particular act, since this is, it's not an isolated incident. I'm sure that it happens reasonably often in this day and age.
Far more often than I think people realize.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning,
Morning.
I would like to know, as far as this lady is concerned, if an unwed mother becomes unwed mother, if a woman becomes pregnant and she's an unwed mother, and she goes to court in a paternity suit, it's up to her to prove the father, who the father is of the child, and the courts back that up. This lady has been artificially inseminated because one lady cannot inseminate another. How does she feel that she has a better right to care and...
Oh, she has the right to care, but you mean the right to claim?
Yes, the right to claim for her children this...
From her partner in the 10-year relationship. Tough one.
Do you want me to do that?
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. We do what we can, and when we can identify a person who seems to be responsible and who ought to be responsible, we seek some help from that person. Here we have a situation in which these two women planned their children. And the issue is not whether we can identify the father, but whether the defendant should be allowed to walk away from that responsibility.
And be taken as the providing parent and putative father.
Absolutely.
Penny Anderson, best of luck, and thank you very much for coming this morning. To you too, Peter Fraser. So one of these days you'll decide whether or not you're going to be happy with half the cake or whether you're going to appeal it.
That's right.
My thanks. Next, Jim Matkin, Business Council of British Columbia, after the break.
Got a new board for you.
James Matkin doesn't have a particularly enviable job as the president of the Business Council of British Columbia. Used to be called the Employers Council, but for PR reasons they changed the name. But you still are the council involving all the big employers in British Columbia.
That's right, but we take a business point of view.
All right, give me a business point of view. As I go through your own materials, I see HLRA, the hospital employees, they've got 20,000 in negotiation this spring and summer. Construction, 30,000. The IWA, 32,000. The pulp workers, 12,000. All contracts coming up for renegotiation now in 1986. What does the climate look like for wage increases for the unionized workers in British Columbia?
Well, the climate is not very positive for wage increases. The pattern has been set during the past few months, and it's one of continued restraint in wage settlements, low settlements, but few disputes as well, not many strikes during the past months.
And I noticed in the BCGEU, the employer proposes no increase for the first 2 years and a 2% increase in the third year. Now, surely even the Employers' Council are beginning to feel kind of sorry for the BCGEU, the civil servants who haven't had anything for quite a while now.
Well, I think one of the key things is really not to have this negotiation with the BCGEU and the public. I think it's wrong on both sides to try to hammer out a delicate matter like this in the public. I think one of the things that they could do is work on problem solving privately and use this notion of principled bargaining where they don't hammer each other with position bashing in the public.
Well, I can see the BCGEU is beginning to get impatient with that, but there's certainly no impatience on the part of the CLRA construction, who just came out and said, we want a $6 to $6.50 an hour cut or no contracts on the 1st of April. That's what they've said, right?
They have said that they are no longer competitive and they need some flexibility and some concessions from the unions.
Big concessions in the unions,
yes.
$4 in wages and $2 in fringes. And the unions have said, we'll give you a rollover contract for a year, but we ain't going to take any cuts. I hate to be pessimistic, but does this not presage a lot of industrial strife in British Columbia for the summer ahead?
It could be a tough year. I think you've put your finger on the two most difficult areas. The hot spots for 1986 are public sector as we approach EXPO and construction. Both of those are tough, very tough bargaining.
Well, the government can always use laws on the public sector, on the BCGEU, but they would find it very difficult if there's a strike comes in the construction industry. But is business that bad? Is it right, as I'm told, that there are no big construction contracts coming up anywhere in British Columbia for the spring?
it's going to be very light in terms of new construction projects in British Columbia. Capital spending is down significantly, has been since '81. We really haven't recovered in terms of capital spending. $4 billion less 1985 over 1981.
Well, what are we going to do about it on the West Coast? Because it's quite obvious that prosperity is here in Ontario. The place is booming, Quebec is doing very well, they've 8% unemployed, and we're asked to believe there are 20,000 new jobs in BC, according to Mulroney. Where are they?
Well, it's better than last year. That's why the figures seasonally adjusted show 20,000 jobs. But the reality is it's still pretty tough. It's not really good, and it's not a full recovery. We're not back to where we were in 1981. And we're on a very much more restrained kind of economic picture with not much good news.
No, even I can't blame Premier Bennett for everything because of the drop in the lumber markets. But they certainly seem to be going very well in Ontario, and we're dragging. Except if it wasn't for EXPO and the Coquihalla, where the hell would we be?
We just don't have a diversified economy like Ontario, based in manufacturing and a lot of small industry jobs. We're much more dependent upon primary resources, and they have suffered badly in the commodity bust.
Well, what are the employers doing wrong that we suffer so much? Why don't we have more secondary industries? Why don't we have diversification? Why don't we do this and that and the next thing, but just sit waiting for the mining and the lumber to come back to life?
Well, one problem we have, Jack, in British Columbia is a poor reputation in industrial relations, and that has harmed investment in this province. It's harmed growth, and it's harmed the ability to diversify into secondary manufacturing.
How do we correct this?
Well,
speaking, you know, as a kind of middle-of-the-road citizen,
yeah,
which most of us are most of the time, how do you correct this now when there's no demand for our products? Do you expect the guy to say, well, okay, I'm not going to get my union job at $23 an hour or $18 an hour again. I'll go get a job at EXPO at $6.50.
Everyone is going to have to contribute to the correction, and it won't take place easily or quickly, and there are no pat answers. But the McDonald report did a good analysis of what is wrong. They identified, and we have it exaggerated, this problem in British Columbia, and that is too much adversarial relations. We're not pulling together enough. We don't have enough an enterprise philosophy within our trade union and employer community, that we should be seen as being on the same team, trying to create success in our jobs. Too much confrontation and rigidity in our labor management relations.
Are there any plans to de-rigidify these kind of things? I mean, I see no one on the horizon kind of whipping and hurraying and cheering us together on a common sense basis. Do you?
Well, I would hope that in the near future, the government might take a lead and set an example in terms of reducing the adversarial relations.
Well, I mean, when the famous restriction legislation came in a couple of years ago, I kind of sided with the line that now is the time for holding back on the public sector employees because of the great sufferings of the unionized employers.
Yes.
In other words, when a contractor goes broke, that's all there is, the guy's out of work. But now Bob Skelly says that the Premier is attempting to set up another confrontation between the unemployed and the public sector workers. You know, and they blame Bennett for the policy of division and confrontation.
Yeah.
And there is some merit to that.
Well, one of the problems I think that the Premier is having is he wears two hats. On the one hand, he is the employer of those 30,000 employees. On the other hand, he is the parliamentary leader of our government. And sometimes statements that he makes, like the one about the CSP, are when he's holding his hat as government leader. Other times when he is negotiating. What this raises is whether we need another alternative in the public sector, such as been implemented in some other jurisdictions, that would allow for this kind of dispute not to deteriorate into a strike situation, but provide another alternative for the parties, a third-party alternative.
You mean a third political party alternative? No, you don't.
No, I mean something like in New York City, where they have Mead-Arb, not leaving the party simply to the strike method of resolving a difficult dispute. Here you've got the parties quite far apart in this GEU battle. That's evident. What other alternatives are there but for the union to take a strike vote? Is that really an effective, successful way in 1986 of resolving a problem like this? Can't we do better than that?
Well, and of course, the CSP contained the ability to pay factor, which made the whole thing a bit of a farce at times, did it not? From the point of view negotiating, when at the back of the negotiators there's a guy sitting saying, ability to pay, there is no ability to pay, ipso facto, no increase.
Well, from a business point of view, it's not ability to pay, it's inability to pay is the only time that that's relevant. And it's not an easy factor to apply.
I think we're up against a bit of a wall with Jimmy Matkin and myself and you too in the economy of British Columbia, and we'll take some suggestions or comments from you after the break.
It will be used to improve the quality of education in our schools, colleges, and universities. The province will also provide about $90 million in additional funds to schools from general revenues to maintain funds at their 1985-86 level and offset school tax reductions announced in last year's budget. We're going to fund special initiatives to improve the quality of instruction, to allow us to respond to economic development opportunities, modernize facilities, and increase efficiency in the system. In the coming days and weeks, announcements will be made that spell out the operating budget adjustments for this year. At the same time, the responsible ministers.
Shortly, we hope to be able to tell you what the Premier is saying at his press conference in Victoria, but we'll go ahead with phone calls. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
That's you.
Oh, yes, Jack. I'm from the Carpenters Organization, and in front of me here I have a list of demands from the CLRA that the Carpenters Organization and the building trades as a whole has just received.
Right, I went through that the other day. What's your point?
Yes, as of January the 20th. In these demands, they're asking, all premiums based on straight time rates of overtime, no tool allowances, no clothing allowances, cut in pay of $5 to $6 an hour, standard no strike, no lockout wording introduced, union dispatch system eliminated and replaced with direct union hire and or name request through Union Hall, increased work hours, and of course with the decreased pay and what have you. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Matkin and the people he represents, their families are all taken care of. How about guys working for, $10, $9 an hour or whatever? How can they afford to buy their own tools? Also,
Okay, but I've got your point. Let me ask you a question. Would you accept part of these cuts, or all of them, or none of them?
Absolutely not. Every one of these demands is aimed exactly at undermining the whole,
Yeah, you got it. Jimmy, he's undermining the whole union business. Everybody's going non-union if they can, and all the rest of it. And you can see the desperation in that guy's voice.
Yes. I think it's important, though, to understand that the situation in the construction industry is going through a mini-revolution. We've already seen in the labor market that affects British Columbia, in Alberta, for example, that these concessions have been achieved in the unionized sector in order for that sector to survive the competition of the non-union sector. That's the bottom line, is that businesses are going under because they can't compete.
And if they go under, that's the end of the job.
And that's the end for the unions and for the business. It's not because we've become ogres and we're not, we're unconcerned about people and getting high wages. We'd like them to have high wages, but we have to compete. We can't compete at the level of the existing wages with the non-union firms.
You can't compete against Kirchhoff.
Well, okay, if you want to use that kind of an argument. No.
Go on.
No.
Carry on.
If you want to use that kind of an argument, then we can talk about all the workers, non-union workers down at EXPO who were getting paid less than the rate, and then we found out that they were being paid even less than what was considered the federal fair wage.
Fair enough. I'll have to move on now, but you made a good point. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. Good morning, Mr. Matkin. Maybe this should be for the Justice Minister, and I may have to call back, but I'm a member of the BCGU. I worked in a local Vancouver hotel here where they paid me an equivalent on the front desk of $1.25 an hour or $10 a day. I finally got into the bar and started working as a waiter where they increased my wage to a whole $5 an hour.
You couldn't work for $1.10 straight wages.
$1.25, Jack.
No, the minimum wage is $3.65.
I know, but I tried to get this in front of the Labor Employment Standards branch, and they told me I was a day too late. It was closed over Christmas, so I couldn't get a hold of them. So now I'm stuck. I was fighting a union battle with the hotel. I joined the union. The minute I joined the union, I came back to work. I was on an off day. I went to work. I was in the bar having a few drinks.
No, don't give me up.
Took me outside in the lobby, beat the crap out of me, and told me, hey, all the dirty tricks you're up to.
Okay, we'll leave you to fight your own particular strange battles at $1.10 an hour. I can't see anyone taking a job at that rate anywhere in BC. Can you?
No, I can't.
So if I'm doubtful about that, I'm doubtful about the rest of what he says. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Matkin, you talk about pulling together. Well, you know, the government employees haven't had a raise in the last five years, really, to speak of. And we have not been immune from all the increases that have taken place. And I speak working from the jail system, and I'm getting to the point where I'm afraid that corruption is going to brew because people are just at the poverty line. And I'm telling you that you've got to give some concessions and make people pull together. And by giving, you get.
Fair enough. Partly something. If they can give, they should give.
Well, that's true. And I think that the economy has said we can't give. But maybe things are getting better this year, a little better.
Go ahead, please, from Prince George.
Yes, Mr. Matkin, you were talking there before, and I happen to agree with your point there that there has to be some better way to settle these union company disputes than strikes. It really does hurt the whole province. But you say there's got to be another solution. Are you referring to arbitration? And if you are, who do you suggest be set up to run these arbitrations so that you can keep the political inclinations away from the decisions?
Well, I think that's a good question. I don't think arbitration is the answer. But
what
I do
were you
think,
referring to then as another solution? Can you give us another solution other than strikes?
well, I think there is a combination of Mead arbitration, which puts the focus on negotiation rather than arbitration, and that you use an independent tribunal to ensure that the parties don't exploit or misuse that Mead arb solution.
And who sets that board up? Or
well, the government has to set it up.
to?
The government has to set it up. But just as the government appoints judges, they can do that in a manner that creates objectivity and partiality.
When you say Mead arb as in New York, you're talking about mediation, arbitration.
In the same, it's not mediation, it's not arbitration, it's a combination of the two. And it makes a difference because it focuses on negotiation rather than on arbitration.
How are these people picked for the board, though? That's my point. How do they get there? I mean, if the political parties set them in there, you might as well be dealing straight with the politicians.
Well, no. Yeah, the first thing is the parties would have some choice on who should be the Mead arb between the two parties. Let's let them try to decide.
Yeah.
If they can't, then you have an independent tribunal, not the government, who makes the
I mean, there are independent arbitrators and negotiators
Sure.
in the system right now who
Sure.
can be appointed by people of goodwill on both sides of a dispute. And obviously, it's got to be some form of mediation and arbitration, and this is a combination, not mediation, but mediation, then the arbitrator, having had the mediation, steps in and said, now, here's the reasonable solution.
Or he doesn't have to step in because with that power, the parties come to a
They finally
negotiated
come
agreement.
together.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please. Oh, no, don't go ahead. Hold on, please. I'll be back after the break.
As part of a Anatoly Sharansky walked across a frozen bridge this morning. Good morning. Today on the noon news hour, the story of Russia's most famous dissident, freed as part of a spy exchange. Anatoly Sharansky walked across a frozen bridge this morning and into the arms of his wife, who he hasn't seen since the day after they were married 11 years ago. Also today, we'll talk to local artists who say they've been slighted by EXPO because the World's Fair won't allow them on site. They have their own plans for an art display. That's today on the noon news hour. Join us.
Decision made. I mean, here, I'm waffling about it.
And then what we're announcing is that the ministers who deal with education and post-secondary will have $110 million in order to
except if I go a little bit
in the first year,
interior
it will
like
be
this.
a 3-year planning. Because as I said, I've held a number of meetings with those involved in the education process in which they want that type of consultation and be able to make the choices of priorities together. And the one thing they didn't want were abrupt changes. They think that
Premier Bennett is following through on his promises on his province-wide speech on BCTV the other night. He's talking about education, special monies for education. This will be the centres of excellence. And here he is in Victoria just a few minutes ago.
today I want to tell you about one such investment. Because of the importance of education to our future, of our young people, and because their skills and training are crucial to our province's future, I'm announcing today the establishment of a fund for excellence in education. In the first year of this 3-year program, we'll increase operating budgets for education by $110 million. These funds have been made available by Cabinet at the urging of Jack Heinrich and Pat McGeer, and the Minister of Finance assures me they are consistent with his fiscal framework. But the educators with whom I've met in recent weeks have asked also that we provide them with a multi-year planning forecast. And while we will spend $110 million in the first year, I can tell you that as the economy expands, there will be additional funding allocated in the second and third years to reflect a growing economy. This fund for excellence in education represents an increase of more than 6% over this year's operating budget. And over the next 3 years, it will be used to improve the quality of education in our schools, colleges, and universities. The province will also provide about $90 million in additional funds to schools from general revenues to maintain funds at their 1985-86 level and offset school tax reductions announced in last year's budget. We're going to fund special initiatives to improve the quality of instruction, to allow us to respond to economic development opportunities, modernize facilities, and increase efficiency in the system. In the coming days and weeks, announcements will be made that spell out the operating budget adjustments for this year. At the same time, the responsible ministers will ask our schools, colleges, and universities to work with them to develop and submit specific proposals to increase the quality of education and improve productivity and efficiency. Funding will be approved on a merit basis by Cabinet. We've already identified some obvious areas of priority in our schools through our Let's Talk About Schools consultations. These include computers, teacher training, language training, including Asian languages and English as a second language, and the upgrading of curriculum and textbooks. At the college level, special projects such as programs to retrain laid-off workers, local economic development centers, and entrepreneurship training also rate high. And at the university level, we want to encourage centers of excellence to make our universities world leaders in areas like biotechnology, Pacific Rim studies, computer systems, forestry research, and international business. We also want to encourage our universities to forge new links with our cultural communities in music, arts, and film. Each of these areas is important and reflects the government's priorities. But the menu isn't carved in stone. We're going to consult with the public and everybody involved in the education system. That means we're going to talk to school boards, colleges, universities, students, and the public to get their views. We want to know how they see the priorities for these special initiatives. We want to recognize local concerns and listen to proposals that may be important to a particular institute or region. We want to see programs that are imaginative yet practical, and we want them to benefit the people the system set up to serve, and that's our students. The consultation process has already started. I met recently with delegations representing all sectors of our education system. We talked about what they wanted to see, and they got my perspective of what we as a government want to do. So this process has already begun, and the pace will pick up in the weeks and months ahead as our ministers meet with school boards, college and university officials. We want our young people to have an edge in skills and in new training when they take their place in the working world. Because if they have an edge, our business and industries will have an edge. I believe this initiative is significant for several reasons. The funding is substantial. It's an investment for the long term that will be good for our young people and good for our province. The end result, of course, is what counts, and I'm confident what that will be. A better education system, students with better skills and training, and the assurance of a generation that's well equipped to take its place in the new economy we're developing here in British Columbia.
The press conference still goes on. In case you missed the beginning of it, announcement by Premier Bennett that in the first year of a 3-year program, there'll be $110 million for improvements in the education system, and this will be schools, universities, and colleges. And there'll be $90 million will go to the school system from general revenue to keep their values and their money at the 85, 86 level. An extra $90 million for the coming year and $110 million in the first of a 3-year program. Concentrate on centers of excellence, biotechnology, training of laid-off workers, Asian language teaching, English as a second language. And he says, rather curiously, funding will be improved on a merit basis by Cabinet. No mention of teachers' salaries, because they're in the middle of the normal matter. Back to Jimmy Matkin and Jack Webster. If there's anything else from the press conference which we should give you, we'll give you it right away. John Crosbie is coming later in the program, but back for the moment to James Matkin, Business Council of BC, and telephone calls after this break. Well, what do you think about that edict? 110 million in the first of 3 years, plus 90 million. Do you think that was a wise and proper thing for the Premier to announce this morning?
Let's applaud their intent of focusing on education. But we must raise some concern about the process. Throwing out money like that, where does it come from? Are we having a new budget? Did they take it from other parts of the budget? It raises some doubts about the business-like way of governing in a democracy.
In other words, he lost the COPE election in Vancouver School Board. All 9 of them elected, and he realized he's in trouble of education, makes his speech, and then goes and finds another 200 million to come out right away to placate those who are unhappy about education.
As I say, education is a high priority, and we can't criticize that, but how does this fit into our understanding of a democratic process?
All right,
where's the budget?
Let me give you my understanding of the democratic process. I have the feeling that Premier Bennett was all set to go for an election. He decided not to go for the election. Had he gone for an election, he could have spent all the money he wanted by special warrant. As of March the 31st, will he not be out of money? Is it not essential for him to produce a budget on the floor of the legislature and have it discussed and passed before March the 31st?
Yes, it is. So that could be where this money will come from, is by some special warrant. But as you say, that can't happen when the legislature can sit.
That's right. So therefore the legislature, it's highly unlikely he's going to call an election now when he's repairing the education system with $200 million, which I'm sure Skelly will call some kind of political recapture fund, some kind of political slush fund. So therefore, we should be happy, I suppose, that he announced $110 million, although I do not like this piece about funding will be approved on a merit basis by the Camera. What does that mean, do you think, James?
Well, I think the merit concepts of entrepreneurism, excellence, productivity, computers, and so on, those are good ideas. But I don't think the Cabinet is the appropriate instrument to be going around making those judgments. It will politicize the education system. There is a university council to deal with the university budgets. There is a college budget and
school
process.
board budgets.
There's school boards, independent school boards who are supposedly in charge of their budgets.
With consultation yet to take place, as I gather from what the Premier said, he's put out this 110 and this 90 for all these various and assorted things which he wants to see improvements on, leading to centres of excellence in British Columbia. So as a representative of the Business Council, you would rather see them discuss it in the legislature and prepare a proper budget than grant money by ad hocery.
Well, I like the idea of strengthening education, but I must say that the past record of the government's implementation of some good ideas has been weak. And I'm concerned that this initiative be implemented in a fashion that will be successful and not create more problems and be another comedy of errors.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Matkin. I would like to know why there is not a law in BC which stops companies hiring scabs and using goons to protect the paid scabs. I believe this prolongs a legal strike, and it always has. It's not fair when the picketers are legal and they're standing up for what they believe in. Could you talk about this, please?
Sure, it's a tough question. The short answer is that the worker, when he goes on strike, has the right to work somewhere else, and therefore the employer has the right to employ someone else. And many disputes can go on for a long time in that capacity. If you're going to deny the employer the right to employ someone, then you're going to have to put a cap on the worker, and that denies his individual freedom. My understanding is most experienced industrial relations people say both should have the freedom to make alternative arrangements in our...
Without, of course, breaking the Criminal Code of Canada, which is a protection against goonery and thuggery, whatever it appears. Go ahead from Oliver, BC.
Good morning, gentlemen. My question is, are these companies that this gentleman is representing willing to open their books to an independent audit to find out if there's really a need for all these serious cutbacks? Wait for my answer. Thank you.
Well, I can just comment on one negotiation that I know about, and yes, the company did and will open its books and show anyone who's really interested the difficult situation they're in. The competitive problem, in this case, of going against a non-union firm makes it apparent on its face that they've got to have concessions. So it's not a made-up issue by management trying to harm you.
Certain political parties arrogantly act as though they have nothing to learn from other countries where this is state-of-the-art labor management relations. I see no one addressing that. If you look towards countries like Germany, say, who have a thing called Mitbestimmung, this is state-of-the-art, and they work very hard. We've all heard the arguments against social democracy, especially by the Socrates, who say it destroys the will to work. But nobody can say the bloody Germans don't work their buttons off. I worked in Germany for 2 years, and we worked very hard. And labor, while I was there was a change in the law that provided for 30% worker participation in the boardroom, and that changed to 50% while I was there. And when the government was discussing this, various large American companies were threatening to pull out, saying this is just terrible, we can't have this. Of course, they're still there, people like IBM, General Motors, and everything else. Nobody looks to these areas where this exists.
Let's ask Jimmy about
no
that.
effort at all.
Jimmy?
Part of it is this paranoia, as I say, about socialism.
All right.
Well, it's not true that people aren't looking. There, in fact, have been some good delegations to Germany and around the world, to Japan and so on. The reforms that he's talking about are in the right direction. That is, they're reducing the adversarial nature. But both of our unions and business aren't really interested.
The Brits, the Americans, and the Canadians have never gone for this worker participation at the boardroom level, have they?
No. But
it seems to work in Germany to some extent.
To some extent. I think there's more likelihood of what's happening now is the Japanese idea of real meaningful worker participation in the enterprise, more involvement of the employees. That is happening in some key successful mining and forestry companies in British Columbia.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. My question is for Jimmy Matkin, and what I'd like to know is why does he feel that students in high school are not prepared and not geared to think of contributing to our country, to our province, to our economy, by saying, what can I do for my country and myself by making my own small company, by making my own contribution? When you get out of high school, you automatically think, where am I going to get a job? Who is going to employ me? You don't think, now, is there a possibility I could start my own enterprise? We're not really taught to think about the rules of business.
Well, okay, it's a good point. Perhaps we've been brought up in too much affluence in the last two generations, too much affluence, where you left the high school, went to work in the pulp mill at $14 an hour, and you had your first Camaro before you were 21.
Well, I think she's put her finger on an important point. You know, the province of British Columbia in the past 3 years have lost 31 million man-hours of employment in the forestry industry. That's in lumber and pulp. What we're going through is a structural revolution as we move from a goods-producing industry to an information society. And part of that structural revolution is that more of us will find jobs in small service companies than in big goods-producing companies.
We won't do as well, will we, on our pay packets at the end of the week?
Well, depends. The entrepreneurs or the ones who actually found those companies will do much better, and many of them will be women. And they will make a lot more money in those businesses than they make presently working as an employee.
31 million hours.
31 million hours.
31 million hours.
Of work lost.
Times $10 even. Is in the last year?
That's the last 3 years.
Last 3 years.
That's the shortfall from 1981.
My God. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm a unionized construction worker, and I was just wondering if Mr. Matkin could answer. Like, if we're expected to take 31% across the board average cuts in the proposal given to us by the building trades. Now, if we go and we take this, what's to stop the non-union contractor from just arbitrarily slashing his employees' pay packages by just as much?
There's really nothing to stop them except the supply of good labor. One of the things that has happened in Alberta and some of the other provinces where this cut has already taken place, so we're not talking about a speculative thing. We're all part of that same labor market. You could go work in Edmonton or Calgary, and wages there for unionized workers have fallen to $13, $14 an hour. So the question is, well, have the non-union firms there dropped even further? The answer is no, not that much, because labor won't go and work for that much less. Mm-hmm. You reach a floor at which particularly skilled, good labor will not work.
Yeah, but at the same time, okay, if we do accept the cuts, well, how is that going to create more jobs when the user of my work, or like the end user, like the pulp mill and the mining industry and everything else, they don't have any new mills or mines on the drawing board. So there's nothing for me to build. Therefore, there's if there is no employment out there, taking cuts is not going to create any.
Well, there are a number of factors that go into building those new mines. One of the factors is the cost of construction, and what will happen is you're making more chance of having a job in mining and forestry because you have made the cost of construction more attractive. There's still the question of the price of lumber and the price of metals.
Well, I can just name some of the projects that I worked on, and one of them is in Daco Mines in Fraser Lake. The other one is Kitsalt, the Molly mine up there. And like it seemed, as soon as we finished building them, they just closed them right up. Like, that doesn't make any sense, what you just said there. It seems more like that the world market of the material that's being produced has more to do with
Well, I think the closure of these mines is just one of the economic facts of life, and thank you for your call.
Yeah.
And take a break now. And thank you to James Matkin of the Business Council of British Columbia. Let's hope that the entrepreneurs lift us up and carry us on their shoulders, and that Mr. Bennett, one of these, calls a session of the legislature so that we can hopefully hear some full discussion of what he's going to do with our tax monies.
Good.
My thanks to Jim Matkin, and I shall be back after the break with John Crosbie. Well, I'll leave that. My guest, the Honourable John Crosbie, Minister of Justice for Canada, just arrived on the roof by helicopter carrying, like the Greeks, gifts.
Yes, this is for you, Jack, to show the love and affection that Brian Mulrooney and I have for you. We hope you're going to reciprocate.
Happy Valentine's Day with hugs and question marks. I'm glad about the question marks. John Crosbie.
I thought here in Vancouver it might have been all right.
Well, now, just a minute. I've got to make a statement on this. I normally don't accept payola, graft, corruption, Senate appointments, or anything of that nature. But I've had a special act passed to allow me graciously to say, on behalf of my famished crew, we are very grateful indeed, and we shall do the honours with your chocolates.
We're allowed to accept anything like this as long as it has a value of less than $200. And I've never been given anything having a greater value than that yet. I get them all assessed by somebody I know.
There's only one thing, though. I'm just going to check this for bugs. Thank you very much indeed. You can come into the shop, Freddie. You don't look that bad.
Jack, I didn't say it was from Eric Nielsen.
No, that's from John Crosbie. Now you've put me off my stride this morning. How can we possibly do a hard-nosed interview about the appalling record and mistakes and faults of the Conservative government since the very day you came into power?
Well, I don't think you're going to attempt that, because our successes are beginning to show through despite ourselves. I mean, the last employment figures show that. Even a hardened newsman such as you must be on your knees praying and giving thanks that we're in.
Except that a little thing in the back of my mind says 20,000 more jobs in British Columbia, and then I say to myself, seasonally adjusted.
No, yeah, but there's a growth of 51,000 jobs in British Columbia alone. That's not seasonally adjusted. You know, that's the actual growth in employment. So, you know, and 580,000 for the country. So that's not bad. Now we have to hope this continues, but it's a good start.
You see, we're going through a great trauma in British Columbia. We used to look across the country to you and think, oh, these poor folk in Newfoundland. Now you look at us and you say, oh, these poor folk in British Columbia, 12.9% unemployment. We've lost 31 million hours of work in the lumber industry in the past 3 years.
Right. But I think that you have to compare to what was happening, say, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and you'll see that there's been a considerable improvement now, and I think the rate here was 15.9%.
It was.
So it's going down in Newfoundland for the first time in a long time. It's below 20%, and in Canada for the first time in 3 years, I think it is, it's under 10%. So this is an improvement. And we had to remember that the nature of the workforce has changed, as you know. There are far more women in it, and people who weren't in it formally. So this is a substantial improvement. But the rest of Canada doesn't look at British Columbia and think you're in difficulties. They still look on BC as a land of opportunity.
It still is a land of opportunity, but mind you, if I was a young guy, I might go to Toronto to make my steak.
Well, it is true that Ontario's doing, economically, that they're doing much, better than the rest of the country, but you know as well as I do, it's the resource areas that are being hurt, your resources and ours. But that'll come back as the world economy improves.
Well, now, we're going to have to deal with some of your job as Justice Minister this morning.
Sure.
But will you give me a guarantee that we won't see any more procession of mea culpa in the House of Commons from you or Eric or anybody else?
Well, this is not my strong point. I don't like this mea culpa business. So I hope that I hope not to be apologizing for anything further.
Oh, good, good. Do you want to start with a clean slate and a new broom, and everything will be perfect in the Federal House of Commons from now on?
That's my intention.
Now, let's talk about amending the criminal code. First of all, there are still people who are out to get you on Bill C-49 and think that you are a reactionary by making soliciting by hookers and customers an arrestable offence, a simple offence nowadays. Have you any apologies, or are you getting pressure from some groups to backtrack on C-49?
No, I have no apologies. We're studying what the results are, and the Parliament within the next 3 years, House of Commons will study the effects. But so far, it's doing exactly what we said it would. It's reclaimed the public streets for the public, and I have nothing to apologize about. The customer is being arrested and charged, just as the prostitute is. And now we don't claim that this is designed to do any more than it's doing, and that's to regain control of the public streets.
And you apparently realize the other deficiency in that we in British Columbia do very little for juvenile hookers, and they can't be arrested under C-49. So what do you plan to do on that area of the underage prostitutes, the pathetic little creatures who are still, not so many of them, on the streets?
Well, as you know, I mean, legislation is only provides a framework, but we're discussing with the provincial attorney generals this week our proposals. But for example, I intend to introduce legislation that will stiffen the penalties, and anyone who lives off the avails of a juvenile prostitute, we intend to make it an offence for anyone to have intercourse with a juvenile prostitute. So these are some of we're going to be very severe with customers or people who live off the avails. And we're going to deal in the same legislation with the area of child abuse and the area of prostitution and pornography.
That's very significant. In other words, what you're saying is that up till now, there's been no emphasis on the fact that a person who had intercourse with a 14-year-old could be arrested and charged.
Well, there are certain offences, as you know, for, say, having intercourse with a person. It doesn't have to be prostitution under certain ages and so on, but not specifically to deal with a prostitute who was under the age of 18 or whatever.
Tell me this, though, one question before we go to the phones. Are you going to be haunted by that charter? You saw that case in Newfoundland the other day, where the guy tossed out a charge for a man having sex with his stepdaughter, because it was unconstitutional, because the charter is discriminatory by protecting only females. Well, that's crazy.
That may be appealed. See, the judge has got a discretion, because under the charter you can decide, is this a reasonable instance of discrimination in a free and democratic society? And I think in a case like that, a judge would be perfectly entitled to find that it is. This judge did not. And one of the things we're going to have to do now in the code is make sure that the same offences that apply to males will also apply to females. So this is the result of the equality section, so this is what we'll have to do.
And the moment you do that, the judge can then convict for the offence.
Yes.
Crazy. Telephone calls to John Crosbie. Long way for a short programme, but very glad to see him. After the break. One question from the police, for the police in Vancouver. We have a problem with fugitives from Ontario and Quebec hanging around Granville Street Mall on non-returnable warrants. Can you lean on the attorneys general to do their duty and grab their people and take them back when we find them?
Well, this is a good opportunity now. They're all in town here, Jack, as you know, till Thursday. But I think one of the problems is that the police of other provinces, if these people have only been charged with relatively minor offences, they don't want to spend the tremendous money involved in sending the policemen out to get them and bringing them back. So it's a financial question.
I know, but it's chintzy of them, because we get stuck with them.
Well, I mean, can British Columbia help it if you're attractive to you attract the good as well as the bad and the ugly?
The good, the bad, and the ugly. We're doing well on the bad and the ugly from Ontario these days. No personal reference intended, because you may issue I apologize right away. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Crosbie?
Yes, sir.
You realize what's going to happen now with that Valentine gift to Jack. that's going to come up in the House of Commons, and you're going to be accused again of all these bad manners that you have.
Conflict of interest.
Mr. Crosbie, welcome to BC, first of all.
Nice to be here.
And I have enjoyed your short record of my knowledge of you since this coming into limelight. It's tremendous. But listen, Turner is making a big thing out about that list, the CZB list, that the taxpayer has a right to know who these people are that have been bailed out, who haven't been paying their bills, and the bank that hasn't been run properly, which you've been accused of bailing out.
Right. Canadian Commercial Bank.
I would like to know, as a taxpayer, who are some of these customers who were bailed out?
Well, I guess it's the depositors who made deposits in the Canadian Commercial Bank, particularly after they got into some difficulty and the government intimated that it was standing behind them and they'd be all right. Now, so I don't think that the knowledge, there's not a question of protecting any particular person, and it may be if Mr. Justice Esty says that would be the proper thing to do, that the government could then consider doing it. But at the moment it's felt that it would interfere with the privacy of depositors and others in the banking system.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you for coming to British Columbia today. And I'd like to ask you what your views on the death penalty are, and also on toughening the laws in general for people who have been convicted of various felonies.
Well, in the death penalty, in my own view, I've always felt that I was an abolitionist, but I've never had to vote on the question. So I've told the police in my own area in Newfoundland that I will look at all the arguments when the question comes before Parliament, make a final decision then. On capital punishment itself, we are committed to providing parliamentary time within the next year or two before our term is over to allow a free vote on that issue. And there's a very strong group in our own party, in our own caucus, who wish a vote on that issue. So I think it's going to be before Parliament in the next several years.
I'd forgotten about your promise, but sometime before that, and there'll be a free vote in the House.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Doc?
That's you from Victoria.
Yes, I just want to congratulate Mr. Crosbie for answering questions put to him and not just providing non-answers as so many of his cohorts do. Thank you.
Is that all? Take a bow. Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
For Mr. Crosbie.
Yes, sir.
Has your government considered legalizing prostitution for adults in Canada?
Well, actually, you see, the position is that it's not illegal now. The prostitution itself, per se, is not illegal. What's illegal is running a bawdy house, that is, where that kind of activity takes place, is illegal, or living off the avails of prostitution is illegal, or being a pimp is illegal, but just being a prostitute itself is not, per se, illegal.
But you will not go for the NDP proposal to take the bawdy house section out of the criminal code?
I don't think that our caucus would support that, but we're considering now what to do we're making a final decision on what to do with a number of suggestions that the Fraser committee made.
Go ahead, please, from Nelson.
Yes, the question for Mr. Crosbie. When you were finance minister, you were seen on Bill Moyer's Journal when he covered the story of the David Rockefeller's banquet for the Boys of Rome. And you were in the background. I nearly fell off the couch when I saw it. And I'm wondering, is it customary for the finance minister of Canada to pay homage to this man?
No, certainly wouldn't be. But I was never on that program, nor have I ever met Mr. Rockefeller. So you must have me mixed up with someone else.
Well, I certainly saw you, but
Good. Another handsome chap with white hair and heavy jowls.
Yes. I don't know about the heavy jowl part.
Oh, they're pretty heavy. Not as heavy as mine. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Yes, I'd like to know why the federal conservatives haven't done much for the conservatives in British Columbia.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, they seem to support the social credit government and abandon the provincial...
That's a kind of pointless question, Mr. Crosbie, isn't it? Why haven't you done much for the conservatives of British Columbia?
Well, we hope that they are, but there's... we'll certainly do what we can to help them, but we also have a natural empathy with the Social Credit Party, who, you have to admit, Jack, are conservative also, with a small c.
Do you want to say that again?
I say that the Social Credit Party is also conservative, with a small c, you know. They're conservative-minded party.
If that box of chocolates hasn't been opened, John, not our usual hard-hitting, strong-minded interview, but when you go down to the Attorney General today, will you give them a message from us that we'd like them to pick up, make their warrants returnable for all these small pusher drug offences, so that when our boys pick them up, they can be sent back whence they came.
Well, if your boys are prepared to put up the money to pay for it, I dare say that...
Oh, no. We bring ours back from Toronto or St. John's, Newfoundland.
But you don't have any, or very few, over there to bring back. Mind you, they're all heading for Newfoundland now. They realize how attractive it is.
My thanks to John Crosbie. I'll be back after the break.
Nice to be here.
EXPO 86.
Expert on international terrorism on Webster at 9 a.m. precisely.
EXPO 86. 80 days to go.
On this morning. Very good. Very good. A court judgment. She was refused maintenance but got a property settlement. It's a good one for John. Have to change the laws of the land. Charter of rights, too. I couldn't get it in this morning. It was too... I'm ready. Come on, let's go.
He's ready. See, I told you. Move it.
International terrorism with an expert tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely. Tomorrow I'm going to challenge the Canadian champion arm wrestler, Leanne Barker. And I'm going to challenge her at 9 a.m. precisely. The more I think of it, the more I'm convinced that Premier Bennett did have an election up his sleeve last week and was very close to dropping the election writ to get the new government firmly installed before EXPO opens. Because why otherwise would he come out today and say he's going to kick in another $200 million to education, $110 million to schools, universities and colleges, and $90 million to keep the school board finances up to date? This can only be described as ad hocery. The fact is that it's high time that we had a session of the legislature in Victoria where the expenditure of our public monies is properly